Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jordan Soto, and I'll be your host for today's Heart Energy webinar, Unleashing the Power of Production and Financial Data. Before we get started, we just need to go over a few housekeeping items to ensure that you have an optimal engagement experience throughout the webinar. Now, if you've joined the presentation using your computer systems by default, but if you'd prefer to join over the phone, all you have to do is select phone call in the audio pane and then dial in information will be displayed. And though all attendees are in listen only mode, we definitely want to hear from you. So you can submit your questions at any time throughout the presentation today. All you have to do is type them into the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. Now, if the webinar speakers are unable to address your questions during the Q&A, they'll follow up with you and address them individually. And with that, let's get started. Today, we'll delve into real-world examples to illustrate the transformative power of data in their respective roles and organizations. Both speakers bring substantial experience to the table, and they'll offer insights into how leveraging data can optimize your operational and financial strategies in the oil and gas industry. Our speakers joining us today are Harrison Bedford, Solutions Engineering Manager at W Energy Software, and Michael Tanner, Director of FP&A at King Operating Corporation. Harrison and Michael, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate it. As we look at our next slide, as we just jump into the agenda of what we're going to be covering today, we're going to be looking at data in exploration and production decisions, boosting efficiency with data, seeing that data use in practice. We'll hear a little bit in detail from Michael on King Operating Corporation's data strategy. You'll hear a little bit from both of us on what's next for data in upstream, and then we'll wrap up with some best practices for integrating your production and financial data. Just to introduce ourselves a little bit more before we get started. Solutions Engineering Manager, I've been with W Energy just over 10 years. And some of the things that we have seen from kind of common challenges are that production and financial data typically exist in separate systems. Those systems usually lack integration because they are from different vendors, and it really can impede and hurt your ability to know where to spend money, where to focus your financial capital. And then some of the reasons that companies just struggle at this is that they've got really efficient products in those two different worlds. So they're really looking at a best of breed type infrastructure where they have a really great production system, a really great ERP. They're typically coming from, like I said, different vendors, different folks in the space. And ultimately that really is the decision that it comes down to is, do they look at best of breed and integrating those two disparate systems, or do they use an all-in-one system? Michael, I'll let you introduce yourself now.
Yeah, no, Harrison, I appreciate it, and Jordan and all over there guys at Heart Energy, appreciate you having me on here. Quickly, a little bit about my background. I broke out in my career in upstream research, moved over into a little bit more of a consulting role, found myself working for King Operating a little bit over 3 years ago. So I've really had an opportunity to see us grow from around 10 people to where we currently sit about 60. And I think, part of what we'll talk about today, this integration of production and financial data, I've uniquely been able to see kind of the life cycle of where we were, where we are now, and hopefully where W is in this software and this integration that we're doing right now is really going to take us forward. So really excited to talk. In terms of one of the reasons why we took this step from, using all of these disparate systems, using sort of what I would call older school techniques to kind of keep track of things in separate systems, the goal moving forward as we got to this point was an attempt to play a little bit more offense versus defense. Me, as somebody who works in finance, 80% of my time, the classic phrase, 80% of a data analyst job or an analyst job is spent just gathering the data needed, and only 20% of the time is actually spent analyzing that data. One of the big reasons for this push of the integration and really the melding of the two was that offense versus defense thing. I want to spend 80% of my time analyzing and 20% of the time gathering data. Ideally, I don't do any data gathering. but there'll be a little bit of it. And that was really kind of the push for this and where we're seeing some of the biggest value. Specifically, also when you're talking about A&Ds, we're a small shop, 60 people, but when you look at the kind of the range of our assets, that number does actually look small. And so when you're in an intense A&D cycle, knowing exactly what your netbacks are and being able to tie that directly to what your production quote unquote is, if you're renegotiating midstream contracts or we're attempting on, to bring in some other assets, there's a lot of ease around that prospecting that makes it really helpful. And then just also drilling into LOS spend. If you're, someone who works in finance, the dreaded LOS statement, anytime I see an LOS statement, I automatically think, well, their LOEs are 45% off. And I think that because it's really hard to tie what's going on at the well level back to what's actually going on or back to what maybe gets lined up in our ERP system. So kind of those 3 round points really brought us to the point where moving forward with W and trying to integrate both these systems was extremely helpful. I'm not going to say it's easy. There was definitely some difficulties that we've had, I think from where and some of those difficulties were just the way our system was maybe set up legacy. And, one of the things we focused on and I really like to focus on when I roll out a technology or I'm a part of a technology rollout is making sure that the systems I'm doing are matching the way the software is set up. Too many times you try to go into a software build or a software, rollout, and I'm sitting there trying to tell Harrison how he should change his software to map my skills. The problem is Harrison's got 100 clients who have all done it different ways, and they've got the breadth of experience to say, no, this is the steps on how things need to melt. And that's really, I think, where the hardest part for us specifically came from, Harrison, was, we had a lot of processes that probably weren't up to snuff per se, or in terms of how things really operated. So being able to realign that stuff specifically with this meld has been super helpful. So that's kind of a little bit of my background and kind of what brought us to this point.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Really, really appreciate that. Good insight. I think as we jump into our first discussion today, looking at data and exploration and production decisions on the next slide, first question that we really, how does integrating production data influence a company's ability to accelerate their exploration and/or production? I'll start off and give a little bit of views with that, and Michael, I'll definitely looking for your input here. But I think that kind of 3 key things really being improved decision making, being able to see that data together, they can have a better of where funds are being spent, where that production is actually happening, being able to match up that high production with spending, or determine if maybe lower production area needs spending to improve that production. Just being able to reduce risk with some of that as well, where you can see some of the impact and implications of those decisions, and then really just having it more fully integrated is going to allow them to have increased efficiency, kind of going through the cycle instead of spending 80% of their time gathering the data. They can really get that to where it's close to that 20% of the time, which really just increases efficiency across the board because you're not having to go out and hunt and gather for all that information.
Yeah, Harrison, I get killed for my catchphrases, but I'm going to say this a lot throughout this conversation. Offense versus defense. We struggled a lot with playing too much defense and not enough offense. And a lot of that defense, as you mentioned, comes from gathering the data versus it's now available for us to make some strategic decisions based off of. So I'm 100% with you there.
Awesome. So thinking about, how really can companies blend those production data with the financial indicators when they're looking to plan out those drilling and operational activities? I think it's going back, and we're probably going to say a lot of similar things today because there's a lot of some kind of key components that really go with it. But it's looking at where things happening that are maybe below target levels. So it's just being able to get a better, quicker insight on that data. So you're not having to wait months. It's days or maybe a week to get that data and be able to really look at historical data and kind of see the trends so that you have the ability to understand those factors and be able to kind of change the necessary approach of where are we using our capital to work out in the field. And then, I think it's talking about the LOS statement a minute ago, Michael, really that's a big driver of being able to look at a lot of data in a somewhat standard format. I think from our side, we see everyone's got an LOS and they all look a little bit different, but they're all, telling a really similar story of being able to look at the data, kind of look at it a couple of different views, which would be really helpful, and just, really find profitable areas. And that's what we really want to attack, talk about going off and, being able to get that information. How have you seen blending that data together, being able to impact King operating companies' drilling and operation activities?
Well, here's a really specific example. In areas like, parts of New Mexico and Colorado where you have unitized areas where on the accounting books it's one cost center, but in the field there's as many wells as you have. In Colorado, we deal with that right now. We've got 30 some odd wells in Colorado that are unitized, so we have one cost center in our accounting software. Well, that's nice for guys like me. It's an easy line to look at on the LOS, but that doesn't really tell me where I'm spending money keeping the wells up. But now when I bring in the production data, I can now see, okay, looking at the descriptions of what these costs are, I can see the majority of the costs are associated with wells that have zero production on them. Something's now gone wrong here. And normally what you'd have to do is, we're based in Dallas, get on the phone and be in great contact with your field guys. And this eliminates that need for what I would call not necessarily constant communication, but allows decision making to happen in real time and not this bevy of back and forth to attempt to figure out exactly where that, say, production is coming. So I think that's a specific example where we've seen a massive improvement in terms of areas in which we've unitized.
That's awesome. That's a great example. We definitely see that from the software side of being able to look at that unit, the well level detail, or anything else that you'd like to add about the King Operating Corporation's approach to making anything else related to risk or uncertainties when looking at kind of that data detail?
Yeah, I think we've covered most of it. And again, we don't want to sound like too much of broken records here, but I think that the idea of offense versus defense kind of touches all of the different avenues that we'll talk about, because when everything is working is simpatico together, it makes it really easy to identify all of the things that are going wrong. It allows you to just lower your risk tolerance. It allows me to very easily tell my CFO, hey, here's exactly what I think July we're going to get paid for on a nat gas in July, because I've got my historical pricing that we've received because my settlement statements are there. I know my production. I can now look at my declines and tell you, yeah, I think we're going to get on a rolling basis this percentage higher or lower than NYMEX. And having that all in one system really helps, actually. And so I think from a risk standpoint, it just allows us to make clearer decisions and ultimately lower decision-making risk as it relates to a lot of the unknowns that we deal with in this business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think as we move into our next slide, just being able to go into those decisions, things that you're telling management, however much more confidence we can give you, that's going to give them more confidence as they make those calls based on your recommendation. So to talk about boosting efficiency with data, one of the things that companies come into us and say, what efficiencies can they expect when they combine these two sets of data? And I think a couple things that I really think about here are improved asset management, because they have the ability to understand how those assets are performing. They can make better decisions, and it helps them to really extend the lifespan of those assets. And then the one thing that's probably maybe not thought about as much with this, but I think it has a play here, is enhanced compliance, because in different operational areas, there's different regulatory requirements, and being able to see, near real-time production data, seeing that financial data all together, it can really make sure that they are combining and meeting all of their regulatory requirements, whether that's through state or federal agencies. And then, I think one thing too to come into play here is, even beyond, if I can go just a little bit beyond production and financial data, there's a lot of data sets out there that companies have the ability to go grab, whether those are publicly available or subscription services. So as the amount of data continues to grow, you know, I'm sure we'll see more innovative ways on how to combine it all together. But I think that just, you know, having a more automated integration for these different data sets, that's going to inherently drive that efficiency that they can expect to see. Thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think from a drilling and from kind of a planning standpoint, where this allows you to really increase its efficiencies, is just time it takes and really understand. You know, every company's got a ranking of all of our different drillable locations and the probability of success and all the metrics that goes into saying this is our number one best location, this is number two X, Y, and Z, and what W is able to do and what the goal of tying all of this stuff together is to be able to more accurately really rank that, so that when the time comes to say, hey, we're going to go take out one of these pods, we're going to go, you know, move around and do some infill opportunities, it's very easy to be able to say, look, I've got everything right here. I've got historical production. I know my netback pricing in this area. I even can look up very quickly and know who my purchasers are in that area without having to spend multiple days sourcing that from all of the different parts of your business. It all can be right there. So that on a drilling side is extremely helpful, and more to have more of in terms of strategic planning. I think on the LOE side, it really allows you to start, for us, it allows us to look at LOE by vendor. And that was something that was a really interesting, speaking of like kind of new ways to look at things. It was something I had personally never thought of looking at in terms of taking that LOS statement. Sure, you want to organize it by cost center, but what if you did it by vendor as well, in order to get an idea of what vendors you're maybe using in multiple different regions, ones that you're maybe, and looking at it, you know, the different insights that you can glean from that are extensive. So I think there's a lot of different ways, as you said, to use this. We're still working through as an industry how it all plays together. But I think having an integrated system that allows for that flexibility is extremely important.
That's great, Michael. And it actually, you know, it really dovetails into, you know, how does having that integrated data contribute to better capital expenditure planning and your reservoir management. And just to drive home a point that you were talking to a minute ago, is that really we're able to have data-driven decision making. You know, it's not so much a gut feeling of, oh, you know, I got a good feeling about this play. It's hey, I'm looking at the data and it's telling me that this is a good place to drill or this is not a good place to drill. So it's really being able to back up those feelings, those intuitions that really have been key to this industry, I feel, and especially some of the going way back in the early days. But you know, really having that data to back up and support the decisions that are being made is key. And you can't say enough about it. You know, and then a couple other things here is just really collaboration and communication, because you're able to increase the efficiency with which different departments can talk to one another, and they can really be looking at kind of a single data set that's a combination of all their contributing elements, to be able to talk about those things and be able to really have good conversations about the operations of your business. And you know, really just kind of to summarize it in as simple a terms is really, it enables more holistic and an informed approach about how to spend your capital, how to plan your reservoir management, and really how you're allocating resources. So I think that, you know, it's really all those things, but a lot of it, you know, is going back to having data-driven decision making.
Absolutely. Offense versus defense. I'm going to keep saying it.
That's great. You know, and then I think to just wrap up here a little bit, talking about a use case around integrating these data sets. You know, one of the things that I've seen, and we'll get into a little bit more on some of King's capabilities, but really it's to go back to the things that we've said a lot during this presentation, is that it's being able to get that data together, being able to more quickly, more efficiently see the data coming together, be able to make decisions on that. And it's really getting the data to talk together, from production, from financial data, from revenue data, from your sales data. It's getting all these different elements using analytical tools. You know, even, you know, we've got companies using Power BI And then there are companies out there that are, using some really detailed, specific analytical software to make decisions, look at historical, look at forecasting, and really just from our perspective on the W Energy side, we're contributing to that. Our data is going into that. We're enabling our customers to make those decisions by providing them the data that they need in a timely fashion. So those are a lot of the things that we've been able to do, supporting their LOS, seeing it by vendor, really cool ideas like that, and really see those profits and costs at the well level in a really detailed, really prescriptive view. Anything you'd like to share on kind of the King operating use case? I know we're going to get into it a little bit later as well.
Yeah, I think it's just, I think you really said it best in terms of speed, and you have individual contributors now can add to this single source where data is now very easily accessible by everybody. And that, as decision making in this industry moves closer and closer to something that resembles like straight up, as you would say, data driven analysis, it allows you to say differences of, hey, an EUR of 400,000 barrels in North Dakota is going to be a little bit different than what it is in New Mexico. It's going to be a little different than in our South Texas asset because of maybe the financial constraints we have around who our purchaser is, things that you would have to normally go all over to find, but boom, now we're all available. So it allows you to kind of think through instead of just, yeah, that's a great well. It might be if it was somewhere else.
Yeah, that's great, Michael. I think as we take a look at the next slide of how can we really see this data use in practice? As far as how can the integration of the production and financial data lead to change or improvement in companies' operations? There's a number of ways that we've kind of seen it over the years to improve those things, but a couple of things that I'll highlight here is really just one, general visibility, being able to see your data. It's not in a black box. It's not somewhere that you've got to dump it to Excel or an Access database or something like that to be able to run your reports or be able to run analysis. It's being able to look at budgeting and forecasting more easily, more quickly, be able to change some levers and dials and say, okay, well, what happens if we increase production here, or we find a way to reduce costs in this operational area? It's looking at operational efficiencies so that you're really minimizing bottlenecks, you're minimizing any issues of just constraints that you may have in the field that you may not be able to see sitting in an office in Dallas or Houston, of things that are out in the field. And then one thing I'll highlight here, just strategic planning, being able to look forward, look at the future, and be able to make some plans as far as where to focus and where to maybe back off a little bit from.
Yeah, I'll start by saying the first thing that this did was save us a bunch of time. I mean, we were spending 10 to 15 hours a week just to generate the reports that were necessary in order to make the decisions that we should be using those 10 to 15 hours to help come to the conclusion of the decision, not just get to the point where, okay, now we can see what our production is that's allocated correctly, layered in with some of the latest workover data, as you mentioned, which I think is really interesting and a way that we've begin to sort of look at how we roll out our workover program, but I think we'll touch on that a little bit later. So, but I really think, and you mentioned this earlier, that the efficiency of seeing it all in one place and not having a black box is extremely critical. And one thing that does, it allows you to source data quality issues much faster. For example, if we're booking costs to the wrong well, and that can happen very easily if you have kind of, especially on your marginal wells. Everyone's got the 15, 20, 30, 50, 60 wells that they care about, management cares about. They want to see the production numbers on that. But then there's a whole host of wells that I like to call company makers, but nobody ever talks about them. They're just slow, they're steady, but sometimes those can get lost in the shuffle. And we find that, hey, maybe we're booking costs wrong in a different cost center. And you would only know that by attempting to overlay the two. And that's part of the reason why speeding up that process, making it more efficient by having that all in one system allows us to cut down the time we spend, not just cleaning and aggregating the data, but then also figuring out, is this data correct or not, and kind of applying what I would call kind of the sniff test to it.
Yeah, that's great, Michael. And yeah, you're definitely right on. There's those wells that everyone knows about, can rattle off their well number, their name, the county and state, and their API number even. But it's all those other wells too that help contribute to the success of your business. Thinking about roadblocks, hidden or not hidden, and combining those. Some of the things that I think about here are, and one of the ones that I think we're most focused on in this conversation are data silos. So it's very easy to get, you've got production data over here and you've got financial data over here, and never the two shall meet. But we're really trying to break that down, and be able to combine that data. I think a couple of other things: data quality. Sometimes you don't always know that your data is bad until you need that data right then. So it's not always the easy decision, but taking the time to cleanse data, especially as you're doing system conversions or putting new thought processes in place around how you're approaching your data, really cleansing that data and making sure that it's of good quality, I think is another roadblock. And then just, making sure that as you're combining data, going from legacy system, separate system, I think just kind of educating the whole group about why this is a benefit, why it's important, because a lot of times we can certainly get to, oh, this is my production data, I don't want anyone to know about it because I'm the expert on it, when in actuality, letting others in on the secret of the production data, or as it relates to the financial data, that's the keys to the kingdom, and you can really see some marked improvement. What were any roadblocks that you saw, Michael, from the King Operating Corporation side of getting that data merged together? And then we'll talk about some tips here.
Well, I think to take a step back, part of the, people say, well, I'm combining production and financial data right now. Well, the question is, how are you combining them? Are you combining them manually? Because that's what we were doing. Before W, we were combining our data together, but it was extremely manual, extremely onerous, and led to extreme data quality issues. So to talk about roadblocks, it's a matter of, you might be doing this already. The question is, how much time are you spending on it? What's your cost of your employees' time, moving them away from other things, and then how much, when you get down to it, and as Harrison said, when you need to make a decision, you look at the data and your CEO goes, that doesn't look right. He might be right because of the idea you're combining for multiple systems. And for us, prior to a lot of this conversion, things were extremely manual. We had mass, really big, hairy scripts that nobody should look at ever, to say, hey, we need to go look to see if there's new data here and update it here. And that single source of truth kind of existed, but it also didn't, because we found a lot of times we sent data here, didn't delete it here, so now things are doubled up and all that. What W conveniently in this single source of truth allows us to is everything talks to each other inside of one system, which allows speed to make speed go quicker, but also cuts down on that data quality issue, because now I know everything's talking to each other. I can trust that a little bit better, and we don't run into that. So just because you're already doing it now doesn't mean you're still not susceptible, because we weren't. And for us, the time variance got too much, the data quality issues got too much, among other things. Part of the reason why this process has been really helpful to us, and it's been great.
That's awesome. Glad to hear that, Michael. And I think as far as lessons learned that I'll share, and I think you had some good nuggets in there for sure. Is one, identify the roadblocks, because you may not every company is the same. You are combining the data, but you need to, so it's not quite so siloed, but you need to find a way to integrate it better. So identifying those roadblocks that are specific to your organization is really step one. And then I think developing a plan on how you're going to do it. It may not be, hey, in a month we're going to have fully integrated data. It's likely not going to go that quickly. But having a plan of how you're going to do it, what you're going to see, how you're going to bring things together is very important to this. And then kind of going back to the last thing I said is there's getting buy-in from stakeholders across the organization, that you really need. You need views from all sides. You can't just have the financial team dictating how things are going to be integrated, or you can't just have the production side integrated, dictating how things are going to be integrated. you really need to have everyone together making those decisions together and working towards, because ultimately it's a common goal of making your company more profitable and being able to focus your operations. Anything you'd add there, Michael?
No, again, I think you summarized it best. I think working towards one common goal, and maybe not goal, but one common set of requirements is key. And that's something that, as we transition and have transition from disparate systems into a single system, you can see the efficiencies, new things are just coming along every day. So it's really exciting. But no, I think we've covered most of this.
Fantastic. All right, as we move into our next topic here, looking a little bit more at King's data strategy, Michael, I'm really going to turn most of this over to you here in talking a little bit about kind of these 4 points for you. So starting at number one, how does King Operating Corporation integrate all of that in your decision-making processes around your exploration, drilling, production, anything that you want to highlight from our conversation so far?
I think it goes back to just, we're we both have legacy PDP wells, but we also we have active rigs. And one of the things when you're in drilling mode is what's the next location, and basically integrating both production and financial information allows us to look at the available locations that we have and more easily decide what's our best location based upon all of the different parameters that go into what makes a good well, because it's not just EUR, it's not just the CapEx. While some of those things are important, it's other things. What region is involved? What's the marketing contracts on it? Who are we going to be able to source for vendors and pumpers out there? We have some assets in Wyoming. It's winter. You do not want to do anything in Wyoming in winter unless you really know what you're doing. So do you duck the well now and complete it in the spring? Things like that, or that's what executives and management is thinking about all the time, and giving them the ability to have all of the things that they need to quantify what makes a good location, a bad location, a good strategic decision, and not conveniently 90, if outside of maybe some land, which not to toot your horn, but you guys have a land module, we don't utilize it yet, but outside of a little bit of land and maybe some legal stuff, production and finance really are the beef and the meat of what is of what managers are looking at when they say, okay, what's our next plan for drilling a well? What's our next acquisition strategy? Or where's our next, where are we headed next as an organization? It really comes down to, in those cases, those two things. So that's really where we've seen a big efficiency of being able to really quantify what we have and categorize it accordingly and feel confident in those categories. I can give you a spreadsheet that says this is our best and worst location. The first question is, based off what? Now I can bring more data to the table and say, this is why I'm ranking this one way and this the other.
Yeah, that's awesome that you've been able to incorporate that into your business practices. Looking at the kind of the next questions here, what have been some of the most effective strategies in managing your operations, and any specific practices that you'd like to share with the attendees today on integrating those different data sets?
I think it's just being strategic on exactly how you want your kind of data pipeline to work. We start with production, then we went to field reports, and then we started rolling out a lot more of our financial spend. And when we design and manage our data pipeline, that's how it was. The problem is it's very linear. And so what we were trying to do, and what W has allowed us to do, is make it more, everything kind of works in parallel now. You can have this data pipeline running all at the same time and not have to worry about, well, production needs to run before we can get our AFE versus actual done because of the chain of events that requires in order for us to get to that point. And that, when using our legacy systems, or really our legacy standard operating procedures to throw out the buzzword SOP, this was, the ability to make things run in parallel and not necessarily series has been, is probably one of the things that have been most effective for us, because it allows us to, as new data comes in real time, everything can update across the board versus, again, that sort of standard chain of events. I don't think just understanding what data you want to capture and what data you don't care about. Now, you might say, hey, we care about all the data. Well, great. But the problem is, as Harrison knows, there's an infinite amount of data out there. So to say you care about it all is doing yourself a disservice, because now there's nothing to look at because there's everything available. I can get you data on anything and everything you want, and more than a million rows. So you're gonna have to get off of Excel. Sorry to hear that. But part of what that means is okay, now we need to identify what's important within this data set and what's not. And I think if you haven't defined that at kind of a corporate level or an executive level, it's going to make it difficult for guys like me who are on the front lines building this stuff, making sure the reports are being correct, to know what's important and what's not. And I spend too much time dealing with data sets or large volumes of data that doesn't necessarily cut through the noise and give us what we need. So strategizing and knowing exactly what you value as an organization really helps then make that data gathering process quicker.
Yeah, that's great, Michael. I think, I use a phrase called analysis paralysis, and you can definitely get there if you're trying to think that, look at all the data sets that are out there, figure out how everything works together. I'm sure you could get there eventually, but again, you would have too much analysis there and you wouldn't be able to make any decisions. And then, then it's not worth it. So great points there. You've referenced a couple today, but any, specific tools or systems that you are focused on using as far as integrating and really doing the analysis of that integrated data for your strategic planning at King Operating Corporation?
So you threw a little shade at Power BI earlier, so I'm going to stand up for everybody who's using Power BI right now. That's mainly the tool we've been using up until this point to visualize a lot of this data. Again, the issue with Power BI is, while there is some native, all the data engineers are going to get mad at me, or the data analysts are going to say, well, you can Power Query, you can do all your transformations in Power BI. Yeah, but it's slow and inefficient. I want to be able to, if I'm going to use Power BI, I just want to be able to link up, whether it's a spreadsheet, I want to be able to link up to a server or link up to a source where that source is handling my transformations, and I'm just using this, basically Power BI as a UI tool to quickly build a chart. No different than I would if I had built and have an Excel spreadsheet and highlighted the data and said insert scatter plot. It's the same thing. So I agree with you on some level that there is the level up of that is make it a little bit more real time. But I think once you have clean data, that's 90% of your problem. You can use any fancy UI tool you want. Again, we prefer Power BI. If you're using more real-time analytics, there's things like Plotly, which are a little bit more analytics based, but they're more web app based. So you can have your data team build that thing in, say, Python, and then it's hosted now online, but it's more of a real live quote unquote web application versus maybe some of like a Power BI or a Tableau. If you're using Tableau in the oil and gas business, that's interesting. I'd love to hear from you on that one. But because most people are using Power BI just because it's integrated with the Office. But as you move beyond that, Harrison, there's anything and everything. I think, the larger companies are going to be having, their custom reporting applications that they're maintaining in-house. The key for, someone like me who's building that base level report is how easy is it to get the data I need, and what does that schema look like, to get technical, because that schema is going to drive what I have to do. And the beautiful part about having everything integrated together is I can think less about the schema and more about what I want it to look like, because I know everything's working together. I don't have to try to, build some crazy data model in Power BI to say, I've got this table here, 5 tables in another file. Let's link them all up with a common key so that I can pull some stuff together. No, it's all there. It makes it really easy. So I'll stand up for everybody on Power BI, but definitely as you move farther along, the need for those tools increase. But again, it's the data that's supporting all of them, and ideally that doesn't change tool to tool.
No, that's great, and no shade to Power BI, no shade. We definitely are seeing that a lot more over the last couple of years. It used to be the Tableaus and the Spotfires, or even just kind of Excel reporting, but no, Power BI is definitely becoming more and more commonplace from my perspective. Like you said, because it's already got that Office integration, it has a similar look and feel to a lot of things. So, Power BI is definitely a tool that's I think being more and more adopted broadly throughout the industry. The kind of the last point here, any advice that you would give to other companies out there looking to integrate their data together to be able to do some of this analysis, but kind of going to that earlier stage, what tips or tricks do you have for those out there listening today?
And this could hit home with you or not hit home with you, and you could, but have an inventory of like what you actually have from a wellhead and on your pads. Specifically, if you're going to go integrate your production financial data, you're going to need to know what your tanks are. You're going to need to know how big the tank strappings are. You're going to need to know almost everything that's on these pads. And we did not necessarily, when we went through this process, have as clear as a view as we would have liked on maybe some of those physical assets on each of these well pads. And that made our transition a little bit harder. Thank goodness for interns. But when you talk about one of our roadblocks there, it was definitely making sure that we had a locked down inventory and making sure that our standard operating procedures and your standard operating procedures match the system that you're going to use. I said this in the beginning. If your standard operating procedure says you need to go left, and you're looking at a software that tells you we can only go right, something's got to give here. And for us, it was looking at, okay, what are we doing? What are maybe some of industry best practices? That's what working with companies like W and larger vendors who have worked with a lot of other companies, so they have experience up and down the value chain, can say, well, most everybody are working their standard operating procedures to go right. Why don't we maybe look at doing that? And that was part of what we had to do specifically with some of the way we reported our production data, was actually switch it up a little bit. One, to grab that more clarity, but to fit exactly what system that you're going with. And if you ever feel like you're having to tell the system to customize them to fit you, there's a disconnect probably somewhere in what you're. Not to say it doesn't happen all the time, but especially when you get into a larger organization with specific needs. But there's too often are we fit my standard operating procedure into what the technology does versus use the technology for what it does well and fit my standard operating procedure into that.
That's great. That's I think that's a big key. So definitely some good insights there from you, Michael. I think as we think about on the next slide, what's really next for data in upstream. They came to us and said, hey, what are 5 bold predictions? Mine, I would say that I'll go through mine, and then Michael, you can go through yours. But looking at data being the new oil. Not to say that data is going to replace oil by any means, but just that today it's getting that data set, going out, finding it, discovering a new set of data and how you can use it to impact efficiently your business operations. The folks who can go out and find that data and how to utilize it first, I think are going to have, definitely be successful out there in the oil field. The second one, the bold prediction is more that not only is it undergoing a digital transformation, I think we've seen that, but I think that we're probably earlier on than any of us fully realize in that transformation. I think that there are going to be things coming down the pipeline that will just really make this oil and gas space really more of a digital space. And so I think from my perspective, my opinion, I think we're just a lot earlier on in that than maybe we think we are. We've talked about data-driven decision-making today, and I think that it's really becoming more the norm. As they get more data, as we become more kind of digitally focused, being able to have that data to make those decisions is just becoming part of your standard operating procedures. I think we're reducing risk by having all that data, by being able to look out, see that information, be able to do the analysis on it, and really reduce not only the physical risk to people, but also just the operational risk of where they drilling, where they making decisions, where they focusing their business. And then, I think it's really data is opening up opportunities for oil and gas companies in order to do all of the things that we talked about here, reducing risk, improving the efficiency, but it's also helping them to develop new ways to extract from unconventional resources. And so, something like that is going to just power us as we move further along in the what's going to be, I'm sure, a long legacy of oil and gas out there. So, Michael, what are some of your predictions here?
Yeah, so I tried to summarize, them pretty quick. I think the first one, the embrace of open source. I think this goes both internally and externally between companies. Internally, I think there's a big problem with data silos, and when I say open source, make data very easily available. Your landman, in my opinion, should be able to go figure out what's the financials look like. So as I'm running title, I know exactly what things look like. And obviously there are certain things maybe you don't want certain people to see, but that is becoming, in my opinion, far and fewer between. So I think within companies, being more open and open sourcing your data sets and allowing people wherever they work to be able to use them to drive better decision making is going to become helpful. Then, quite honestly, I think between company to company, I think we're going to start seeing a lot of it more. I mean, King, we have some open source code base that everybody can go check out right now, how we manage our data pipeline. I think companies, as they realize that embrace this idea of more knowledge and the idea of data is the new oil. If that's really the case, then we need to figure out where all of it is and figure out how to collaborate so that we can get as much of it as we can. And I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of that. I've seen some of it happen so far, and I definitely think you're going to see more of it come. In terms of the little guy has the advantage, we talked a lot about speed and accuracy and kind of it brings it 2 and 3, my predictions sort of meld together. But the faster you can move and the more accurate you can make decision makings, that's going to lead to a long-term customer. Someone like W is going to have long-term customers if they're able to get their clients having quick analysis and they're being able to make sure that it's accurate. But then for me, that's gonna allow me to make decisions quicker. And I think as larger organizations grow, the decision-making process slows down. You go from having 1 level of management to 4 levels of management. So I think as we move into this era of there's so many decisions that need to be made, because as we mentioned, data has become plethrable. There's an infinite amount of data. I do believe that the little guys are going to be able to succinctly decide what they're looking for and be able to cut through that noise a little bit quicker than maybe some of these legacy players. I know if you're in Colorado right now, you're probably like, well, everybody's going through consolidation up there. Maybe in certain sectors like Colorado, oil and gas, where you're seeing that consolidation. But I think specifically, I think in Texas, you're seeing in New Mexico, the little guy is going to continue to be able to cut through some of that noise and be able to make decisions a lot quicker through that value chain. I kind of went over speed plus accuracy. If you can guarantee me that, you're going to have my business for a while. So I think that's fairly clear. In terms of integration, I think we've gotten to the point where if you don't integrate with another software product, you're in trouble. If the only way I can get data out of your software is exporting a CSV, you're in trouble, man. It's going to make it really hard for me to go pitch that to other parts of my company to say, this is why we need this software. They're first going to ask me, well, cool, well, what can we do with it? Or if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'm thinking about purchasing this software, when we get to the part of, okay, well, how are we going to manage how are we going to manage the data in it? If the answer is, well, if I need to get it out and do my analysis, I need to do a CSV with it. That's going to move that. That's going to really sour me on that aspect. And I think that, I think integration is something that we've talked about as an industry for a while now. And I think it's really starting to come forward. I couldn't tell you, there's very few software products coming out on the market right now that don't easily integrate with other things. And so I think you're seeing that become really much of a standard. And then, this is a play on words. I hate the word dashboard. I think it's way overused. Everybody says, build me a dashboard, build me a dashboard. What they probably mean is build me a report. But I think as things and decisions are made in real time, the dashboard's going to go away because everything's going to be able to be seen in real time. A dashboard is used to look back and consolidate historical data. But if you're now consuming the data in real time, do you really need a nice dashboard that is bringing all your bells and whistles? Sure, maybe for some levels, but a decision making that happens in real time, mainly requires, specific set of data. And I think as we move in this industry, I think we'll see people move away from dashboards in the traditional sense and back to maybe straight more reports. But as data is delivered in real time, it really eliminates that need for, a quote unquote dashboard in the traditional sense, which I think is fairly overplayed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely some good thoughts there, Michael. Appreciate that. I think before we jump into questions, I think on the next slide, I wanted to leave you with some best practices for integrating your data together. So we've got 3 and then a bonus one here. So one being identify the right data sources. So making sure, taking a step back and saying, okay, what am I really needing to integrate? And I think kind of a sub point here is you don't have to integrate everything day one. Integrate your key elements and then add in your additional data sources as you need that clarity, as you need that additional analysis. But it doesn't have to be perfect day one. I think if you think about cleaning and standardizing the data, we talked about this a little bit earlier, making sure that your data is cleansed, that it's ready to be integrated, that it's kind of all looking the same is really important, because you can't really compare apples and oranges, but you've got to make them all apples before you can link them together and really get that good analysis off of it. Like Michael said, your CEO could come to you and say, hey, this is wrong, and he knows it because he's been in the business for 30 years. And he's right. So you got to make sure that you get that data clean. I think very importantly is you've got to test the integration, of course, but then you also need to monitor that integration. So, technology, as much as we love it, as much as we utilize it, it's not perfect. So making sure that you're, doing kind of regular status and health checks on it to ensure that things are integrating the data together correctly, that you're getting that output that you really want. It's really key to not just kind of set it and then forget about it. That you're gonna want to make sure you just keep a little bit of an eye on it. And then my bonus tip, and really this could be, if you think about processes, this could almost be number one. You want to really define the goal of the integration. So I think this is key, because it's great to have an integrated data set, but what are you going to do with it? What decisions are you trying to think about? What are you trying to make with it? So I think if you can even take just a little bit of time, define what are you trying to do, I think that's going to inform what are my right data sources? How do I need to clean the data? What data do I need to clean? And then how am I going to test and monitor those integrations? So I think defining the goal of the integration is almost as important, if not more so, than the actual technical bringing of the data together. There's a QR code there. If you scan that and you want to send me any thoughts or questions, happy to receive those and follow up with you. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear if there's any other best practices that folks on the call today, that you utilize in your business. I think now, we're ready to move into a little bit of Q&A from the questions that have come in for us. So we will move on to that. And there's both of our emails if anyone wants to connect further with Michael or myself.
Fantastic. Absolutely. It is time for our Q&A portion of the webinar. We'll open up the floor for Q&A. Remember, you can submit your questions by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. And actually, as you were going through your presentation, we already got a few questions in. So our first question is directed towards Harrison. They say, our company has been growing over the years and we're at about 100 operating wells. When is the best time to get a system like W Energy to better connect what is happening in the field with our back-end ERP?
That's a great question, Jordan. I appreciate whoever wrote that in. I think not to be cliche, but I think now is the time, to start looking at those systems. I think, we've got customers who are kind of span the gamut of size, but I think that, getting a system established, getting your processes, your procedures, your integrations in place, I think it will only serve you to improve that integration, that capability as you look to grow beyond those 100 operating wells. So I'd say that now is really the time to start that search if you're not looking for that already.
And our next question is directed towards Michael. What were some of the tipping points that made King Operating decide they need a system to better integrate these two data sources?
To go along with the last question, to be honest, if you're at 100 wells, that's when we're at 200 wells. We should have switched to 100 wells. So, to Harrison's point, I think he's absolutely right. You should start looking at it. Some of the tipping points for us was, again, sound like a broken record, offense versus defense. We just found ourselves more and more having to spend time reconciling systems, reconciling data, doing those steps that Harrison talked about, 1, 2, 3, and 4, having to do them every single time we wanted to redo some analysis or update it with some new information that came in. And that time value of money just became too much. And that was really where the tipping point came in for us, was how much time we're spending just to maintain systems when we should be necessarily, consuming the data from them and allowing us to make better decisions going forward. So that time value really caught us and was probably, and in my opinion, the main driver for me. I think if you talk to a couple other people in our company, our CFO might mention the reporting capabilities that W has. You know, our production guys love the fact that the field data capture app's there. But from my end specifically, that time value money we're saving across the organization, can't beat it.
And our next question is directed towards both Harrison and Michael. So Harrison, we'll give you the floor first. How can companies with older or legacy systems approach this integration?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think some of the things that we've talked about here, especially at the end, you know, with older systems, there's a high likelihood of you really can't integrate the data save for exporting that data. You know, there's a lot of Excel work being done. You know, my tips would be start looking at some of those newer, more current systems that have that higher integration level that allow you to really, you know, interact with a tool like Power BI to be able to perform that analysis. You don't have to do everything at once, but really growing into that new, more modern tool set will only serve you so that you're not having to manage and maintain those old disparate systems and those kind of older connections. That would really be kind of my tips there.
And Michael?
For everybody screaming Spotfire, yeah, you can use Spotfire just fine. We didn't mean to forget about that. No, I think Harrison really said it best. Just understand, you know, what's the outcome of what you want to do and find a tool that best delivers that, whether it's, you know, maybe a more custom application or something as simple as, you know, Power BI, Spotfire, where it's boom, load the data set, get ready to roll.
And I think we have time for one more question. Again, if you have a question that you'd like to get to our presenters, we'll go over how to get that to them if you have additional questions, and they'll follow up with the questions that we weren't able to get to as well. So our last question is actually directed towards Michael. The questioner says, we've been looking at vendors to help with this. How should we evaluate the vendor? If you have any insight there.
I think it's like identify what the pain points are with your current process. For us, it was speed and accuracy. And so when we looked at every single vendor, that was the goal. Are they going to be able to speed up our process, whether it's, you know, our jib cycle, whether it's, you know, reconciling, you know, production versus, you know, actual well levels versus netbacks, or, you know, allocating to the wellhead level and not the battery level. All of those different aspects, you know, were problems that we've dealt with. And when we evaluated each vendor, we tested that against that criteria and you see where that lies. For us, it landed on W. Everything matched up with what we want. For you, the listener here, I think it's important to, again, I think he mentioned your bonus. I think going back to the original slide 10, where we had the bonus, Harrison, his little bonus thing is great, because defining the goal of what you want to do with the vendor switch is going to drive that, and then you can then use that to test your, you know, new vendors against that. So I think defining what success in your mind looks like is going to be your best bet.
Fantastic. Well, Harrison, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time today. Again, for our audience, if we didn't get to your questions, or if you have additional questions, all you need to do is send them to the contact information you see on this presentation. Thank you again so much for joining Hart Energy's webinar featuring W Energy Software and King Operating Corporation. I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. I hope you did as well and learned a whole lot. If you'd like to rewatch this webinar, it'll be on demand and available to you next week. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.